What's going on, everybody? This one's going to be a fun one. Let's learn how to read from a file. Let's get it.
Because I can't read.
Okay, let's jump right into learning about how to read from a file. I'm going to go ahead and open up my Java folder with Visual Studio Code. And before I actually write any code, the first thing I want to do is open a new file. We're going to call this grocery list with an underscore .txt. And inside of our grocery list, we're going to add things that we would commonly buy from a store. So we'll say apple, bread, milk, eggs, water, and then maybe we'll add something like we would normally do, like stop that menace, Spider-Man. What? I see you looking at me. Don't judge me. I mean, it's just Jonah Jameson. Of course he wants to get the Spider-Man. Anyway, let's get back to it.
Get out.
Who are we to say that he shouldn't be able to do that? So let's go ahead, save this, and create a file. I'm going to call this reader.java. Before we make our class, I'm actually going to do something we haven't done before, and that's going to be importing something to help us read from a file. Here I'm going to import java.io.star, which is going to bring the IO library into our project to allow us to read from a file. You're getting kind of a 2-for-1 with this video by learning how to import things into your project as well as learning how to read from a file, which I think is pretty cool. Let's get to the main point though. So let's make our class. It's going to be class reader. And then we're going to make our main method like we have a million times before. Say it with me. Public static void main string array args, and let's get into it. How do we read from a file? We know that we have a grocery list over here on our left hand side that we want to read all of this fun stuff from. But in here, we're going to need to find a way to do that. Well, the first thing we were going to want to do is probably define our file. So I'm going to start off by making a file object. We're just going to say file equals new file. And then we're going to want to get the path of our file. So let's go ahead, right click our grocery list if you have this, and go ahead and do copy path. We're going to put 2 quotation marks here, and then we're going to paste our file into the quotation marks that we have. Now we're going to want to do one other thing. We're going to want to do a backslash next to every single one of the backslashes in this file path so we can escape the different slashes that are there. It'll make sure that we can find the file properly. So make sure to drop those in there. Otherwise, you might get an error. Now that we have our file object, there's definitely a couple of different ways we can read from a file. I'm going to show you the hard way first, so that way you can understand how it works, and then we'll do the easy way. So to the hard way, we're going to call a FileReader object. And I'm going to call this fr equals new FileReader, and then we're going to pass our file. Okay, so now that we have our FileReader object, this is what's going to help us read from that file. But the way it works is it's going to read it by character basis. So for example, this letter A is going to be the very first thing that it reads. P and then L and then E, that's going to be the order that it's going to go, but it's going to do it in a very weird way. So let me show you what I mean. I'm going to do a while loop where we're going to loop over the entire file and print it out. But let's print it as an integer. Ready? We're going to say int c equals fr.read. That might seem weird to you, but let's now do a while loop over that variable that we created. So we're going to say while c does not equal -1. You might be thinking to yourself, okay, you were already being weird with how you're checking for an integer instead of like a character or a string. So why are we checking to see if this is -1? Well, turns out that if you hit -1, you're at the end of the file. Now what we want to do inside of our while loop, let's go ahead and just simply print out what we're getting from the file reader. So I'm just going to do a system.out.println, and I'm going to print our C that we defined above. And just to make sure that we don't run into an infinite loop, I'm going to go ahead and say C equals fr.read. And let's see if this works. I'm going to save this. And let's go ahead and compile and run this now. So I'm going to cd to my desktop and my Java folder. And then let's compile with javac reader.java. We have an error, and it says, must be caught or declared to be thrown. So what it's telling me here when I see this error is I'm not catching this error. If there is an error, I'm not passing the message along. And the way I can do that simply is by making our main method throw an error by saying throws exception. By adding that to our main method's little declaration up here, that's going to actually allow us to throw the error, and whatever the error is, it's going to be propagated forward. Now that we have this, we should be able to compile and run this again. So let's go ahead and compile. It compiled successfully. Now let's run it. So by doing Java Reader, and look at that. You have your entire grocery list here as a bunch of numbers. Who would have thought it? Well, there is a way to make this actually intelligible where we can read it. And the way we can do that is by casting it to an actual character. You might be thinking to yourself, what do you mean by casting? Well, let's show you, and then it'll make more sense. So instead of just printing the integer c, I'm going to put parentheses, and then I'm going to put char and another parenthesis. And this right here is effectively a cast. I'm saying, hey, whatever the next thing that you see is, we're going to make that a char type. By saying that, this is now going to print out the letter that that number is associated to. So let's save this. And let's go ahead and compile and run. And look at that. We have our message, and it says apple, bread, milk, eggs, and water, and all of the other fun stuff that it says. But it doesn't look very easy to read. So I'm going to also now take a moment to show you something that I probably should have showed you since the beginning. You don't only have to print things with println. You can actually print it with just print. And what that does is it prints everything on the same line. So if I save this now, let's compile and run. So we're going to compile and run. And now you can see that we actually have apple, bread, milk, eggs, water, and stop that menace, Spider-Man.
Parker, hello, you're fired.
Why?
That's another way that you can print. And you also learned how to cast something to something else. And just to kind of drive the point home, let's go ahead and put this back to ln. So remember, C is going to be an integer type. We could actually convert C to whatever we want to. So I could technically cast this to a double. So if I actually put double, just like this, let's save and compile and run. And now you can see I actually casted all of my character values, my ASCII values, to a double. Would you really want to do this in practice? No. You would only really want to cast an ASCII value to a character type, so that way you can convert it to a string later or use it for whatever purposes you have as a letter or its symbol. So that is the hard way to print out whatever you read from a file. So let's do the easy way with what is called BufferedReader. I'm going to erase all of this here that we have, and we're going to use the BufferedReader object by saying BufferedReader br equals new BufferedReader. And then we're going to want to pass a FileReader inside of it. So I'm going to say new FileReader, and we're going to pass our file. And let's just give a quick explanation for what's going on here. We're creating a BufferedReader object that's going to consume a FileReader object that's reading the file. Remember, FileReader is going character by character. BufferedReader is going to allow us to go line by line by default. You can actually change it as well, but we're not going to worry about that at the moment. For now, let's just know that it's going to go line by line instead of character by character. So one thing that I can actually do now is I can define a string, and let's call this item for the items in our grocery list. We're going to say string item equals br.readLine instead of just read, just to know that it's pulling in the line itself. And then we're going to do another while loop. So we'll say while item does not equal null. Because if it is null, then we know that we've reached the end of our file and we're done. And now let's just print it like we normally would. So I could just say system.out.println item. Let's give this a save. And now let's go to compile. So we're going to come down here and compile. We have an error. Let's see what the error says. Cannot find symbol buffered. It looks like I spelled buffered incorrectly. So let's go ahead and add that E that I missed right here. We're going to save this. Now let's compile again. No errors this time. So let's run. And we got apple, 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 apple. So I not only made one mistake, here is my second mistake. I don't set item to anything else. I created an infinite loop. So if your infinite loop is still running, make sure to hold down Control and push the letter C, or if you're on Apple, Command C. And now let's make our item. So we're going to say item equals br.readLine. And now we shouldn't have any mistakes. Let's go ahead and save this and run it. And you can see we finally have our list. We have apple, bread, milk, eggs, water, and stop that menace, Spider-Man. And you know what? I'm going to say it. He is a menace.
I told you he's not a menace.
No, I'm just kidding. But that is the basics of reading from a file. And I wanted to show you FileReader first because it gives you an important understanding exactly how this is working under the hood. But then BufferedReader takes it a step farther by making your life a little easier. You don't have to cast to anything. But the fun stuff that you learned in this was you learned actually how to cast something to something else. You also learned about ASCII values, which is also pretty cool too. So basically this lesson was more than just reading files. It was to catch a lot of different things that you might run into while you're trying to read a file. And those are the important lessons I hope you take out of this today. Other than that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Dino in the future. That's going to do it for today. As you can see, reading from a file is not too bad. It's actually pretty easy to do. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the comments below. Other than that, I am DB. You are you. Let's keep rocking. I'll give it to you today. And let's keep learning. Peace out, everybody. All right. Bye.